You're listening to EduVoices, Champion Foster Futures, a podcast amplifying the voices of those transforming education for children in foster care. Each episode brings you real stories, research, and advocacy efforts to improve the lives of foster youth. Don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. Now, let's dive in.
Hello, my name is Dr. Stephanie Barbary, and I'm alongside my co-host, Dr. Dusty Palmer. We're your hosts for this podcast. In today's episode, Inside the Foster Parent Journey, Daily Realities, Challenges, and Successes, we are honored to introduce our guest, Dr. Selenda Cumby, Assistant Professor in Educational Leadership. Dr. Cumby brings a unique and powerful perspective as a former foster caregiver and a lifelong educator. She embodies the belief that every child deserves someone who never gives up on them.
In fact, she reminds us that stability for foster youth depends on the collective efforts of caregivers, teachers, school leaders, CASA volunteers, counselors, and the entire support system. Her guiding vision, safe today, strong tomorrow, and that speaks volumes. Dr. Cumby, we are so grateful you are here with us today. Thank you for joining us and for the powerful work you do. Before we jump into questions, we'd love to give you a moment to share any opening thoughts with our listeners.
I am so happy to be here today on the Texas Tech campus. It brings back a lot of great memories. It also brings back, this particular topic brings back a lot of great memories working with kids that have been in foster care. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, so let's get started. I guess to start us off, what motivated you to become a foster parent?
That's a great question, Stephanie. My children had grown up and left the nest. I was a single parent at the time, and I truly believed I had a home to open up as well as lots of love to give. I actually began by being trained in providing respite care for parents that were in foster care. And then I decided that I would begin sharing my own home full time. I fostered 3 young girls in my own house. Then I began fostering twin boys after they left and discovered they had 5 other siblings. And so I sold my home and I rented a cottage and a van from the children's home here in Lubbock to prepare for that large sibling group.
Wow, that's incredible. So what did a typical day look like for you in your foster home?
Oh, my goodness. When I looked at this question, I started thinking back about, what those days look like. And you have to realize that a school day would look different than a summer day, just like it would in any home. And to begin with, when they're coming into the home, there's all kinds of appointments that have to be made. For instance, the dentist, because many of these children have not taken care of their teeth, so sometimes they even end up going to specialists and all kinds of things, to take care of those issues. They're usually behind on their shots, so we have a lot of visits to the doctor office. And those are not very pleasant at the very beginning, but it does get better. And of course, we have counselors coming in or taking them to the counselor. We have CPS visits, agency workers, and then also family or parent visits. So that scheduling at the very beginning is very, very hectic. Some things that we did or I did in my home was we had weekly chores that rotated, and not only were they responsible for their own room, so every Saturday they were required to make sure the room was clean, to actually clean their own restroom, clean their own room. We're talking about sweeping, mopping, and dusting, teaching those skills. But then we also rotated things like cooking, grocery shopping, washing the dishes after we eat, things like that. And they really enjoyed, probably the thing that they enjoyed the most was the cooking.
Yeah, okay.
And, and it was a great opportunity to bring in cultural foods and things like that I might not be aware of because they plan the menu, and then the other people, whoever's in that other chore would go do the shopping for them and bring it back, and we would have a great time cooking together. But anyway, as far as a school day, we would prepare clothes, especially when I'm speaking to this, I'm thinking of the sibling group of 7, because that was the area where I really had to get organized. And so, of course, we would prepare clothes and school packs and making sure homework was ready for the next day. I would go every room. So, the good example of being able to rent that home was most of the kids had their own bedroom because it was a very large house and they had their own restroom. So that was really nice. The twins did share a room. The 2 elementary sisters shared a room, but the teenagers had their own room. So that was really nice. And so I'd go into each room and I'd make sure everything was picked up, ready for tomorrow. And I would have prayer time and just a hug and a kiss to everyone. Of course, the teenagers, but I would do it anyway. But, just that quiet time, helping them to relax a little bit and go to sleep. And that was a real tough time sometimes, and we can talk more about that in a minute, because that's when the tears usually come. Okay. So sometimes you'd end up spending a little more time with someone that was struggling with something going on or missing family or something of that sort. Of course, the next morning, getting dressed, hair. They were African American. I am horrible at hair, and I was horrible with their hair, and I apologized every day. But anyway, we'd attempt to do hair, and they would ride the bus to school, so that was nice. Sometimes I would have to take the twins earlier. They had disabilities. They were non-readers as 4th graders. So I'd have to take them earlier to a teacher that wanted to tutor them before school, which was wonderful. So I'd have to provide a ride for them. Then they would arrive home from school, and we'd have homework time. So it was a table, large, probably almost like this, that we're here in this conference room. And all 7 of them would sit down and get out their homework, and we would be working on it. During that time, I really reflected in that here I am. At that time, I had a master's degree. I had experience as a principal. I had difficulty helping them with their homework. Of course, I had a lot of disability, 504, dyslexia. 2 of the students had dyslexia. My 2 boys were non-readers. So there was a lot of issues. Even the oldest, who was 17, he was a sophomore in high school and way behind on his credits. And so in that particular situation, I was just thinking, how does their mom, who is non-educated, handle this?
Right, yeah.
Here I am, and I'm certified and have education experience. So that really drew my eye to that issue. As far as summertime, I've tried to provide new opportunities for them, because there was a lot of first. They hadn't gone to eat at a restaurant. They had not experienced any kind of a vacation time, camping, fishing. They did attend church some, but that was a new experience for them as well. We went to museums, movies. We got memberships at the swimming pool so that they could go and be involved in that. So we all owned our own bike. So we would go for mini trips just all over the city of Lubbock. People would see us, and I know they probably thought we were a strange sight, but it was a lot of fun. The oldest, I helped him get a job at the mall. So he was working at the mall, and that was good for him, a good experience for him. And then also you have those celebrations, Thanksgiving and the traditions that they would have, Christmas, 4th of July, birthdays, and that's a real tearful time because they're really missing their family. But their family traditions, you try to bring in their family traditions for those. And even attending weddings, they may not have attended a wedding before. When you provide these experiences, you have to give them a heads up on what is appropriate behavior because they've never experienced this before. They didn't know how to read from a restaurant menu or to order or to even understand what they were ordering. So there's a lot of preparation before you go places like this, make sure you have safety boundaries, but also give them experiences.
Wow, this is already so insightful. I mean, I will disclose that I don't have any experience as a foster parent myself. I've only worked with students in foster care through the school setting.
Right.
So, just hearing you talk about your own experiences, one of the biggest things that jumps out to me is, just the blending of the cultures, right? And because you talked about, traditions like that maybe you would have done with your kids, traditions that they may have done with their families and bringing those together. And it's almost like building a new sense of community, a new family, so to speak. And I imagine, that was a very positive experience for both of you, or for everybody involved.
Yes.
But were there ever any times where that was challenging to deal with? Like, I mean, thinking about what you said about expectations, right? What's appropriate and not appropriate. Did you learn anything from those challenges and those conversations?
Oh, every
I imagine, right?
day. Yes, every day. It was such a great, we became, when we first formed our family, I guess you would say, and I was able to collect the two older brothers that were actually in drug rehab. So I picked them up from drug rehab. And then the three sisters was in another community, and be able to bring them together. It was really great to see that family culture once you had all seven of them together. And I learned so much from them. For example, I talked about the hair issue. Right. I had 4 boys and 3 girls, and the 3 girls had beautiful hair. And I would actually go to a neighborhood salon. I would be the only white woman in the salon. And I would always get scolded, "Girl, what have you been doing to their hair? You're not doing anything." And I'd get scolded. And then maybe someone would come in and, kind of encourage me. But I was horrible with hair, those poor girls. But I was doing the best I could, But even like when we were dancing and they would make me dance, and they would laugh and they say, "You dance like an old white woman," or something like that. And we would just cut up and have a great time. My education experiences were in a high population of minority students, so I felt like I kind of had an idea of culture, but there was so many new insights that I had not learned, that I really did learn from these children. It was such a blessing, wow. Such a blessing.
You've talked about some challenges. Is there a particular challenge that you could go into more detail in how you handled that?
First thing, and I know this sounds horrible, but it is absolutely true. Almost any child you have that comes into foster care, unless they came from another foster home, usually comes to you with lice. And so being able to get that under control, learn that mayonnaise is your best friend. So it really takes care of it in the hair, but making sure everything is washed and heated appropriately to take care of that. So that's one of the challenges that I managed. Once you get it under control, unless you're assisting with respite or something, you may have other children come in the home. Usually they're not the new foster care kids, so that wasn't quite as bad once we got it under control. But the educational gaps, research states that and I experienced that myself, is that most of these children come into education and they're generally a minimum of 2 years behind. But what I also saw is when they have that stability, they make awesome growth. They may not be to grade level by the time they leave my home, but it was wonderful to see them getting close to grade level. And also just assisting with that hurt and the trauma that they experienced and the meltdowns, being willing to care for them, especially the night that they had a family visit or even the next day at school. Usually if there's any discipline issues, it would probably be at school the next day, just because their hearts were hurting. They love their family and they want to be back with their family. So just a lot of hurt in working through that hurt.
Speaking on the families and biological families, how did you navigate that relationship between the children and their biological parents?
That's another great question, and to be quite honest, I don't know if I handled it correctly, but it worked for us. I was very kind and friendly at the visits. I think sometimes foster parents have a little bit of an attitude toward the true family because of the situation. I found it as an opportunity for me to foster that mother and foster the family situation a little bit. The mother had my cell phone. She would call me sometimes, usually at night, usually pretty late, and just crying, just needing encouragement as she's working through her plan and hoping to get her children back. She was always very thankful, especially because I'd brought the 7 siblings together, so that made it a real special relationship because she was very thankful, and so that helped our relationship. And even whenever their grandfather, they were very, very close to their grandfather, and he had a heart attack and was in the hospital. And I made sure that they had the opportunity, of course we had to get judge's approval, to be able to take them to hospital to see him, because I knew that might be the last time they would see him. And of course, even after being reunited with the family, after about a year and a half, they even came to visit me. The mother would bring them to visit, and it was just a wonderful conversation and trying to keep up with them and seeing how they were doing.
So if I can interject right quick, is that typical? Like how common is it for the foster parent to have conversation or even just access to the biological family, or vice versa, right? Because whenever you say she's calling at night, mostly, like, I'm thinking about boundaries. And so is that normal?
Probably not.
Okay.
And that's what I'm telling you, is that I felt like I might have had an unusual situation. And just being a large sibling group like that, no, we did have phone calls, and that was perfectly fine. Yeah. And that was usually scheduled, and I'd give them so much time on the phone, for each child to speak to the mother. But like giving them the phone number, that would not always be a good situation. I just felt like it was a real positive one. But you're probably right. That was probably an inappropriate move. And it could have been a very negative situation instead of a positive.
Yeah, well, and I think, too, I applaud you for doing that, honestly, because isn't that what it's all about? Yeah. Don't we want the parents to stay connected to their kids? And if they don't have that option, and I get, there's certain situations where maybe that's not the best.
Right.
Right? And so, like, in this case, however, maybe that wasn't as big of a risk to allow, contact with parent whenever she wanted to. I think that's great.
But, I do want to tell you, Stephanie, though, but it was with contact with me.
Gotcha, okay.
Not with the children. She did not have unlimited conversation with the children.
I see, okay.
So that's important, too, because that is always supervised, usually by the foster parent, and it's also timed, and approved. So
Okay, okay.
Selenda, you had talked about sometimes when the children are with their biological parents for the weekend or have visitation, and then they're back with you, and they're back at school on Monday morning, and the school's calling, and they're having emotional breakdowns at your house. How did you support the mental and emotional well-being of your children?
And I wish I had Stephanie's degree, because that would have been wonderful. School psychology, that would have been awesome. I only relied on agency trainings, utilizing their counselor, even if it was a phone call, and asking for advice. The agency caseworker was phenomenal, so she would also come and help whenever there might be a breakdown or an anger tantrum of some sort, and you know what it's from, and you know the cause. Even one of the teenage girls had a psychotic episode, and we ended up having to take her to ER. And the caseworker and I really struggled because basically the medical community wrote her off. She was hearing voices. She was seeing a male that we're assuming probably raped her. And she was reliving that experience over and over for several hours. And we felt like we were not receiving any kind of treatment that she might have needed at that time. Mainly caring and loving them through those, not disciplining them for behaviors sometimes, but having those critical conversations are important. Helping them understand and self-regulate is very, very important, especially to be a member in society in the future. And so, we kind of helped them through anger, but we also laughed a lot, later. And, not about the situation, but just learn to help them make sure that it doesn't go into deep depression, because that can occur as well.
If you're finding value in today's conversation, don't forget to subscribe to EduVoices, champion foster futures on your favorite podcast platform. Subscribing ensures you never miss an episode packed with powerful stories, expert insights, and actionable strategies for supporting children in foster care. Plus, it helps us continue growing this community of educators, advocates, and change makers. Now, let's get back to the conversation.
about some positive things? Can you share a success story of a foster child that thrived under your care?
This is so exciting because that's what you want to remember is the positive, not the results of my care, but it's that whole village, because it's all of those people that are involved help make that success. I guess the story that I want to tell about is one of the twins. Of course, he was a fourth grader, like I said previously, that was a non-reader. He was also emotionally disturbed and classified that at school. He had been to a psychiatry treatment center. He had something that he always wanted to be in close proximity of me. And I don't know why, even when he was angry, when he was happy, when we were having fun, he was the one out of the 7 that always wanted to be beside me and wanted to be close. When I first picked him up, they did not have any clothes, so we had to go to the store, and I think it was just Walmart was all it was, just because it was like 10:30 at night. They are expected to be in school directly. And they didn't even have pajamas. They just came with the clothes on their back. And so I took them to Walmart and attempted to do shopping for these twins. And he was rolling around, literally rolling around on the ground in the aisles. When we got up to check out, he rolled up in a fetal position, and there was no talking to him, moving him, nothing at all. When we went to the introductory doctor appointment, he was behind on shots, so they were going to give him a shot. He literally went under the couch. It took a doctor and 2 nurses to get him out from underneath the couch and to give him his shot that he needed. And so there was a lot of trauma, and he caused a lot of trauma for other kids as well at school and things like that. And even at church, he would be the one, and this is kind of a funny story. He even laughed about it later as he grew older. I was a church pianist, and so all 7 of the kids would sit on, 2 or 3 rows back. But he's the one that I would have to direct him to come sit with me on the piano and help me play the piano. Just that close proximity always helped him a lot as well. I think the counseling, the psychiatrist, agency caseworker, they played an important role in that as well. The poor little 4th grade teacher who was expecting her baby any day would see them from 7 to whenever school started every morning. Just precious. All of these people that cared for these kids just really encouraged them to blossom. Also having him involved in sports, he found out baseball was a really good sport for him. Again, riding bikes, he loved to cook. And also having my own family members kind of adopt them as well, but especially him because of his special needs. And so my grandfather, it would be my father, but my kid's grandfather was a grandfather figure to him. And they greatly missed their grandfather. When he would come to visit, they really had a special relationship.
I think as you're talking, I think about, all of these people and parties that have an impact on the kid. But, the reciprocity of that relationship too, there's no doubt that these kids also have made an impression on the adults that have helped them,
yes.
And I'm
yes.
sure y'all could think back. Obviously beyond the 7 students that you had in your room or your house, that you were taking care of personally, but like the other students that you had, I keep calling them students. I guess it's hard for me to call them children just based on my background.
I guess I started saying me too because I call them foster students a lot of times.
Really? Okay.
But foster children.
Yeah,
foster children. Yeah.
And so just to see the impact that they may not realize that they've had on all of these people that have been a part of their lives either. And so I just never really thought about that before, I suppose. So you're talking about all of these, people that are involved, all of these factors that, contribute to their overall positive outcome. Taking a step back, we think about what it means to be a successful parent to our own kids. In foster care, how is it any different, or is that metric different in how we measure success in raising foster children? Or what would you say about that?
Oh, definitely. And I think the reason being is because they have such a opportunity for growth, or needed growth, maybe I need to say, emotionally, physically, possibly even, of course, through education. And so I agree. Something that really bothered me at times when I would see other foster parents would be whenever some foster parents had their own children in the home, and I brought mine in, but they were adults.
Right.
So it was almost like older siblings. And even my daughter was the one that helped me with the young man get a job at the mall. She was working in a store, and she talked them into hiring him. So they worked together and built a relationship, like a older sister relationship. I think a lot of that, and so sometimes when I would see foster families, we'll call them families, and they had their own children, what I experienced was them buying the fancy little go-kart for their own kids, but the foster kids can't touch it.
Oh, wow.
Or their clothes may be a little cuter than what the foster kids were wearing, or something of that sort. They would perceive it more of a business than maybe an institute, more than they did as a family. So I think it's very, very important that family value is there and that it's equal among all. But just seeing, yes, they have more growth, but when they have that stability, it's fantastic to see that growth. And you get to experience it, and it's such a joy.
You have lots of great experience to share as a foster parent and some great insights. Speaking of new foster parents or those considering to be foster parents, what advice would you give to them?
So some advice I would give them is that these children come with baggage, and unfortunately it's usually a black trash bag. They come with that baggage and those problems, and they're not there to fix them. There's no fixing. They're there not even to be sympathetic. They need to be empathetic, and they just need to be there for support and to teach as well, to teach skills that they have not been taught possibly in that home.
For our listeners, could you explain what the black trash bag is?
Yes, so basically CPS would go to pick the kids up, and they would give each child a black trash bag. It's usually a large yard trash bag, and say, go get all of your belongings. It has to fit in this bag. And so they'll only give them, possibly, and it would depend on the situation, how traumatic the situation is, because you may have parents that are arguing and fighting, and there's a lot of screaming and crying going on. So they may get one pair of one shoe from a pair. They may not have all their clothes, and the clothes may be dirty. Again, it might have lice, or whatever. Getting that favorite teddy bear, but they usually only have a certain amount. It could even be 10 minutes that they have to grab all their belongings and put it in that black sack, trash bag. And so when they appear at a foster parent's door, they're standing there with that black trash bag. It's very heart-wrenching, to be quite honest.
I can only imagine. And thinking about at school, too, and
Yes.
not having anything and the clothes that they were wearing on their back. Can you go into maybe what the school would see and have to experience from the next day?
And I will have to say it might not have been the exact next day. We would try to get them registered because those doctor appointments are extremely important. Follow up with the medical. That's the greatest need before they go into school. So a lot of times, but the state of Texas really encourages and almost requires that those kids be in the classroom within 3 days. So you have these traumatized children in a brand new home, probably with a new culture as well. And then they're in a brand new school. They're already labeled, a child of foster care. Because you drove up in that big white van, and everybody knows what's that big white van stands for. Oh, they must be in foster care. Trying to sort out educational records, which is usually not a skill that most foster parents have. Luckily, I did. And so I could argue credits for, the high school boy, just assure that they're in the correct classes and things like that. I assisted the school with that. But just the trauma that they also experience. Not all schools have, a child psychologist at the school. And so a lot of times it's the teachers, the counselor, the principal, most of the time, that is having to deal with these behaviors and adjustments to the classroom in a new school.
What would you advise the parents that don't feel confident contacting schools or don't feel like they're educated enough to contact? What would you recommend for them?
You know, and I think, Dusty, that kind of leads in to one of the other questions about what improvements need to be seen in the foster care system. And that's because I think we need to do a better job. I think our foster parents are trained to deal with the emotional side. They are not trained to deal with the educational side. Many a times, too, foster parents, this may be a type of income for them, and I hate to say that, but it's true, and they may not be educated themselves. So it's difficult for them. So I do know that there is now, which I think Texas has moved along in this area. And to be quite honest, I've forgotten the name of the file. You might the signature that you're required. The educational liaison, I think, is what it's called. I'm not sure here in Texas. That's supposed to be the person that assists them with their education. So usually that's a great time to bring in a CASA worker that might have served as a principal previously. It might be even an educator of some sort that the agency could pair up with them to help them and assist them with that. So that would be some suggestions that I would have.
Thank you for sharing that. I think there's lots of opportunities for new foster parents to go to, such as CASA, get advice from, even if their kid is not in the CASA, is not assigned to a CASA.
Exactly.
I still think organizations like that would provide them information and resources to use. Are there any other improvements you would like to see in the foster care system?
One thing that really, and I have to follow up with this, that after these children were reunited, actually inspired me to work on my doctorate degree here at Tech. And that was my intended topic, was foster care and educational growth. However, at that time, I took a full-time job at the Lubbock Children's Home as the education coordinator. So this really came into play. And what I saw a lot with our teenagers at that situation was they were graduating without a driver's license. How do you work? How do you get to a job and not have a driver's license? But it was a real liability issue that would come up. Plus, they don't have the opportunity in a situation like that to have a car that they could drive. So many times I would put a teenager in my own personal car, and that could possibly be a liability, and it probably was, but just to help them get their driver's license as they move into that adulthood. So I think there needs to be better transitions for those older students that may not even graduate from high school. They may end up dropping out of school. They kind of fall out of a society in a way because they still have a lot of skills that they need as adults, and they don't receive it. I always thought it would be a great opportunity. Perhaps if I had stayed at Tech, it might have been something that I could have written in a grant or something. But I always thought it would be great to have like an apartment complex or maybe a large house that could be used sort of as a dormitory for those students, have someone there, as that home base to assist those students as they're going into college. Texas does a great job offering opportunity in education. However, if those kids are still 2 and 3 grades behind the grade level, then the possibility of them going into college is very slim. Something else I could think of, too, is providing CPS workers maybe a reduced caseload. They are so overloaded, and they do such fantastic jobs, but they usually and generally do not stay in CPS care for long because of the stress and the caseload. And so I think better care for our CPS workers would also be a benefit.
You've certainly given me a lot to think about, as I've just been listening to you talk about your experiences. My wheels are turning already of like the gaps that are in my mind, even about the foster care system. You have me thinking about, well, what does my own professional association say about this? What resources are out there? And, I've obviously seen some, but not in depth, and thinking
Right.
about all of these little things that we take for granted outside of foster care, even just with our own kids. I think if anything in education, special education even, I wouldn't say we recognize that being average is a gift, right?
Right,
And thinking
right.
like having basic needs met
Yes.
is a gift and a privilege that some students don't have. And so already I'm thinking about, who else can we bring in to have this conversation about, what other resources are out there. So thank you again for visiting with us today and, just sharing your story and your perspectives. I think what really radiated today through what you were saying was just the humanity that you showed, right? And, you said, you more than once, I felt like you said, maybe we don't usually do it this way, or maybe it wasn't supposed to do it that way. But again, you thought of the person outside of the system, right? And so I appreciate that. I appreciate you bringing.
Thank you, Stephanie.
And saying those things, because I think we forget it's about humanity, and it's about bringing that warmth. It's not just about policies and procedures. It's not the red tape that we constantly run into, but what can we do as to be a good human to these kiddos. So thank you for that. Again, like your honesty about the challenges, along with the hope found in success stories, your offering of encouragement to future foster parents out there, or parents that are new to this journey. We all appreciate your support. And again, we're just so very thankful and grateful for the work that you've done, and certainly the kids that you've impacted over the years. So thank you. Thank you for being here today. And if we can ever be of service to you, certainly reach out to us as well.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for joining us on EduVoices, Champion Foster Futures. We hope today's episode sparked new insights and deepened your commitment to supporting foster youth. For updates, bonus content, and upcoming live sessions, subscribe and follow us at EduVoices, Champion Foster Futures on all of your favorite podcasting outlets. Until next time, keep listening, keep learning, and keep advocating.